Each and every year, when we arrive at Parshat Noach, at the portion of the Torah called Noach, about the character, the Torah begins with something, a description that seems to be obvious and very straightforward about the character of this individual, of who Noah was. That seems to be like his resume for becoming the chosen one before Abraham was the chosen one. Noah is the chosen one. The Torah seems to describe the characteristics of Noah that are unique and that stand out and that seem to be worthy of emulation and certainly make him the worthy candidate for being the savior of all humanity in this myth, in this story. And as a yeshiva student, as a young yeshiva student growing up, that simple, obvious description was almost always undermined by the immediate commentary on this description, given to Rashi, the French commentator on the Torah. Let me give it to you so you hear what I'm talking about. So the Torah says, Eile toldot Noach. These are the generations of Noach. They introduce us to Noah. Noach, ish tzaddik haya. He was a tzaddik. What's a tzaddik? Keith, what's a tzaddik? You're a tzaddik. What's a tzaddik? Tzaddik. A holy man, a righteous man. The word tzedek, like tzedakah, righteousness, right? Ish tzaddik haya. He was a tzaddik. And you would think that that's a pretty good thing, to be a tzaddik. First person called a tzaddik in the Torah. Really the only one called a tzaddik in the Torah. And then it seems that the Torah then adds something. Tamim haya b'dorotav. He was wholesome, tamim, from the word tam, meaning pure or simple. We know it from the 4 children, right? One of them is tam, like a tomfoolery, tam, like simple, simpleton. Tamim haya, he was really simple. In his generation, b'dorotav. So if you're reading the Torah just as kind of your average book, without needing to parse words or feeling like anything is extraneous, you think, oh, he's a righteous, wholesome person in his generation. Sorry about that. Like a righteous, wholesome person in his generation. Super wholesome, super righteous. Great, awesome. So that's the simple meaning, right, Gary? That's like we learned about that. But then, of course, as you know, and others who grew up in yeshiva, or if you studied this before, Rashi seems, along with the rabbis, to be troubled by the mentioning of his generation. Why was he wholesome in his generation? What do you mean in his generation? What other generation could he be in? You can see how Jewish neurosis begins. It had me at commentary, right? It's like, what do you mean? In his generation. So you're thinking, prose, that's the way stories go. Nope. For the rabbis, if God writes the Torah, every word that might not have been necessary is there for a reason. So Rashi, of course, quotes early commentaries that say, those who don't know who Rashi is, he's a person. I'm not talking, Rashi is an acronym for a person. Lived in France, the greatest commentator on Torah and Talmud and other Jewish literature. Rashi says, Yesh shedorshim oto l'shevach, v'yesh shedorshim oto l'gnai. There are some people, Yesh shedorshim, there are some who expound, there are some who comment this in his generation as praiseworthy, right? It's there to highlight praise of Noah. And there are some who see the extraneous, superfluous, miyutar word, bidorotav, in his generation as lignai, to say that he wasn't so great. Those who say that it was l'shevach, for praise, what do they say? In his generation, right? The greatest of his generation. Great, simple meaning. Who are those who say that it's not l'shevach, not to praise Noah, but to actually cut him down to size? They say, in his generation he was great. But if he had been in the generation of Abraham, can you hear Babe Ruth, Barry Bonds, other, right? It's kind of, in this generation he's the greatest hitter, the greatest this, the greatest that, comparing generations. And I always, of course, was troubled by this, and I wasn't alone. I think many of us who study this, if you've ever studied, thought to yourself, what is... The Torah is absolutely explicitly calling this person a righteous person. Why would anybody want to cut him down? Why would anybody want to diminish the greatness of this mythical or this character? So I found a couple of Hasidic masters who were also troubled by this, and they give a really novel approach that actually I think is very instructive for our lives. There was one Hasidic Rebbe whose name was Rav Meir from Mishlan, and he said like this: two things Rashi has come to teach us, he writes. Two things. First is that when it says there are some who expounded this to praise and some who expounded it to be critical, it means not commentaries, but humans in general always find a way to see anyone both as praiseworthy, and the very same person becomes the locus of critique. And the Torah comes to teach us, he says, Meir Premishlan says, everyone has experienced some version of gossip, some version of label and libel against them. It doesn't matter how wholesome you are, no matter how good you are, no matter how wonderful you have seemed, at some point somebody will find you problematic. And then he says something very profound, that this, he says, it's up to us to learn that it's not always relevant, he says, to listen, he says. We don't always have to give credence to the conversations of people and their chatter. Ha'emet lamitahi shenoach tzadik tamim ki divrei Torah v'lo ka'otam shedarshu midat tzidkuto lignai. He says, listen, in the end of the day, who wins in this conversation? The Torah wins. And the Torah said he was a righteous person. There are some who say he wasn't, and some say, well, if it would have been in this generation, or he's such a great person in this moment, but if he was, it's just circumstantial, right? The chaff will rise. It's not really who he is, she is, they are. The Torah, in the end, says, Rav Meir Premishlan says to us two things. One is, there will always be gossip. There will always be people criticizing and tearing down. And in the end, what really matters is what the Torah says, or what it will be written about you by those who knew you best. And this last insight from a different Rebbe, the Kuzmir Rebbe, Rabbi Cheskel of Kuzmir writes, he says, the great thing about the Torah telling us that there were some who expounded upon, right, this tzaddik, this righteous person, for praise, and some who were critical of him. The greatest of this is to teach us, says the Kuzmir Rebbe, not only will people gossip about you, but if you are going to be a great leader in the world, and the only thing people are saying about you is praiseworthy, you're not a great leader. The Kuzmir Rebbe says that if you're going to do things that are difficult in the world, if you're going to make changes, if you're going to take a stand, if you're going to have courage, if you're going to be like Noah, which we usually don't imagine Noah, as this fierce character. But to some degree, the Kuzmir Rebbe says, there are going to be some who say what you did is really great, and there are going to be some who say, you know what, I could have done it better, or I would have done it better. And the litmus test, the Torah says, of being a tzaddik and to be tamim is not that everybody likes you. And that if you want as your litmus test for leadership, you will fail. It's so horrific to hear from a friend of mine last night who's very, very involved in politics, who told me about a friend of his whom he knows for a very, very long time. It shouldn't be as a shock to anybody here, right? His friend is a politician, and he's running for office, and he posted something yesterday that was so absolutely craven, so absolutely remarkably, but maybe not so remarkably in our current climate, so remarkably irresponsible and frankly crazy, because my friend knows that this person didn't mean it. But he wants to be elected. He wants to be liked. Simple. I know. What a simple message. But I think that Noah's character, which is often assailed in the tradition when compared to Abraham and others, is a remarkable character for us. Someone whose name means like nice, comforting. The Zohar, the 13th century mystical work, says that Noah's name is mentioned twice in the first verse. Noach, right after each other. Right? It says, Ele Toldot Noach. Like you can look in the Torah, you see two Noachs, one right next to each other, parsed by different grammar. But Noach. The Zohar says he was sweet above and below. Everybody liked him. Noach le'ela, Noach le'tata. Like, up on top in the heaven, they were like, what a great guy that Noah is. And then below, they're like, oh, yeah, Noah's a sweet guy. He's a good guy. He's nice. I don't know about you, but I have my mother. I don't think she's watching this, but God, I love you, Mom. But just a joke that you know that we have in the family. Your favorite adjective for people is that four-letter word, nice. Nice. Mom, how was that person? Nice. Do you like it? He's so nice. That Luke with God, he's so nice. And we'd be like, Mom, is there anything else to say? Like Luke's an artist. He's a young guy. He's brilliant and creative. Yeah, all those things my mother said, but most important, he's a nice guy. Noach is a nice guy. He's Ted Lasso. Noach is Ted Lasso in the way of being the perennial ridiculous optimist that he is in the character. And yet he still had his detractors, right? Some people saw him being too nice. He's too nice. He's too optimistic. He's too unrealistic. He's Pollyannish, saccharine. Oh, goodness. Yesh dorshimato lignai. Oh, Noah. Sadiq tamim haya b'dorotav. My friend said one of the more hopeful signs that he's seen in the last 10 years is that a show like Ted Lasso 5 or 6 years ago would have tanked. It's not juicy enough. It's not angry enough. But all the trends, he said, are pointing that people are a little bit done with mean. A little bit done with the politics to some degree. Maybe not. Maybe half the country isn't, or maybe two-thirds. I'm done. I'm done with listening to the negativity. I'm done with having to care at all about the critics who think that being a good person, being a nice person, being a mensch is something that's worthy of anything but the very thing that the Torah is witnessing. Right? There'll always be detractors. There'll always be people like that. But the Torah says, if you want to build an ark and have people get in with you, if we want to actually survive the deluge, begin with the commitment to being noach la'ela, noach la'tata, nice above, nice below, recognizing that there are people that will be naysayers and people that will do that kind of thing, and you take the high road, you take the Noah road, and we rise together.